I grew for CBD the first 2 seasons, like 95% of all licenses in Kansas were designated for. And I was going to some of these events and farmers were talking about walking their fields and pulling out males and drip tape. And it just did not equate to what I see as traditional production farming.
That's Sarah Stevens. She's the CEO of Midwest Hemp Technology in Augusta, Kansas. This is the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. My name is Eric Herlock, and today we will hear my conversation with Sarah Stevens about Midwest Hemp Technology. We'll hear all about the hemp processing facility in Augusta, what they make there, how they work with farmers, where they source their seed, what kind of challenges they've faced along the way, what it's like working with the Kansas Department of Agriculture, what it's like working with the other hemp processors in the state, because there's a few of them now. And from my perspective, Kansas is really shaping up to be one of our great hemp states. So all that and more on today's show. First, a quick word from our sponsors, and then we'll get into the episode. This episode is brought to you in part by New Holland Agriculture. New Holland is a proud Lancaster County company with a strong global presence. For over 125 years, they've been building, selling, and servicing machinery to help farmers feed a busy world. You can learn more about this world-class leader in farm equipment at newholland.com. This episode is brought to you in part by IND Hemp in Fort Benton, Montana, where their mission is to provide innovative agricultural products and services to connect American farmers with the pioneers and businesses that see hemp as a way to bring real and lasting change to our communities and planet. IND Hemp. Okay, welcome back to our podcast. Hope you all are doing well. So here we are. It's the first full week of December 2023. Got a couple of nuggets of hemp news for you here today. This first one I am reading on hemptoday.net, and the headline reads, UN report on hemp marks path to an $18 billion global industry. And so the story is all about this UN hemp report that came out, which is really, this was just my segue to talk about the report. So I downloaded it. I'm in the middle of reading it. It's like 84 pages long, and it says things like, the cannabis sativa L plant is a versatile multi-purpose crop. Given that its roots, flowers and fruits, stems and leaves have various medical, industrial, and nutritional uses, their exploitation could generate significant agricultural benefits. Thus, a so-called whole plant approach based on the exploitation of all parts of the plant should be at the core of any sectoral development strategy. This approach could facilitate the creation of production chains that are able to contribute to growth in rural areas, in manufacturing, and in the food processing industry. Yeah, so it's a super cool report. I'll put a link to it on the show page at lancasterfarming.com. It's a download, and it was put out by the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. That's the UNCTAD, for those of you who are into acronyms. Here's a nice uplifting story from South Dakota. I'm reading this one on the Yankton Daily Press and Dakotan. It says, update, South Dakota hemp industry is on the grow. Local hemp producer sees bigger things ahead for the crop. This story is written by Randy Dockendorf, who writes that last January, Wakanda farmer John Peterson tried to convince other producers to grow industrial hemp, as South Dakota was one of the last states to set up a program. Just a few months later, the Rushmore state has emerged as second in the nation, with plans to blow past the other states this spring. In only the second year of production, we're already at 2,540 acres of hemp in 2022, he told the press in Dakotan. We finished ahead of Texas and just behind Montana with 2,999 acres. We've set a goal of 10,000 planted acres by next spring. Peterson, along with Derek Doman and Ken Meyer, outlined those plans during Monday's information meeting of the South Dakota Industrial Hemp Association. So yeah, there you go, South Dakota. And you heard me mention Derek Doman. I caught up with him last summer on our tour across the country. I met him in a hemp field in South Dakota, just a few miles north of DeSmet, South Dakota, right above the Laurel Ingalls Wilder homestead. So yeah, it's great to see that South Dakota is making a play for this because there's so much farmland out there and we need to be growing hemp on as much of it as we can. So wishing you luck, South Dakota. Finally, this last story comes to us from Cannabiz.com. The story says that a newly formed global hemp body has named an Australian to its inaugural board. This story is written by Steve Jones, and he writes that a leading Australian hemp advocate, Charles Coves, has been appointed secretary of the newly created Federation of International Hemp Organizations, the FIHO, as the industry looks to present a unified global voice. Coves, a lawyer turned motivational speaker and author, is secretary of the Australian Industrial Hemp Alliance and was named in the same role for the Belgium-based Federation of International Hemp Organizations at its inaugural annual general meeting. The current Australian Industrial Hemp Alliance president, James Vosper, said the appointment will give Australian farmers and others in the local industry a voice on global matters. The formation of a global organization, which has been 2 years in the making after 20 national bodies formed a working group in 2020, signals the transition from interim leadership to an established official organization, a statement from the Federation said. All right, well, there you go. That's the news from here. I'll put these links on the show page for this episode at lancasterfarming.com. And just one more thing before we get into the show. I know the Asian Hemp Summit just finished up, and there's some people that I know are making their way back to the United States now. And I'm hoping to publish like a special episode with a couple of interviews from folks that were over there. So if it works out, you might be hearing that later this week. So, okay, let's get on to my interview with Sarah Stevens from Midwest Hemp Technology. Sarah Stevens, CEO of Midwest Hemp Technology. Welcome to the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm excellent and really glad to be here with you. Thanks, Eric.
Absolutely, yeah. So first, I wonder if you could give us a brief introduction, about you, where you're from, your background, that sort of thing.
Okay, sure. My name's Sarah Stevens. I live in Wichita, Kansas. I grew up in Wichita, Kansas. I graduated from Wichita State University. I have a master's degree in public affairs. And after college, I spent some time in politics. I think campaigning and working on those types of projects has always been kind of a calling. I spent some time with FEMA and the Red Cross. I did disaster assignments after college, worked as a congressional liaison for FEMA. That was, really, it was a great career for after college because you're still young and you travel with no notice and show up and stay in hotels. And I did that for a while. I also always bartended in college. And so while I was bartending at Waltz, which is a great little neighborhood bar here in Wichita, I always kind of felt bad about people leaving there driving home drunk. And I was one that served them and started a business called Safe Riders and ran that with my husband for about 7 years. We sold that business. But we drove people home in their own cars, and it was pretty innovative at the time. This predated Uber. This was like 2003 to 2010, and was a lot of fun, but very difficult work. It was difficult clientele. People have been drinking. You get them at the very end of the night. You're trying to find their house and get them home safe. And it was a great foray into business and a lot learned, but it was a lot of late nights. And when I started, I was 25 and that was okay. And by the time I sold it, I had 3 kids and that was just, it was pretty tough work. So that was a great education though. And I just have kind of had this entrepreneurial heart, I think, that was really encouraged there. I met a lot of cool business owners through that. And I still ripple benefits from that business still come find their way back to me. So I'm really appreciative for the time. But I stayed home for a little bit after that with my kids. And then I went to work at Freddy's Frozen Custard and Steak Burgers, which is a national chain that started out of Wichita. And I started there were about 30 restaurants. And when I left there was about 300. And I was the director of real estate and public affairs there. And it was a great place to be, great fun. But the hemp was coming along and I was just kind of, I'm an advocate, I'm a believer in medical cannabis. And that was really my first entrance into knowing about hemp and cannabis. And so when you could get your license to grow here in Kansas in 2019, that's where I did. And that's where it started.
Cool. Well, from that, I get the sense that you have an entrepreneurial spirit and you really like helping people.
I do. And I think like you solve problems for people with your business. That's what I think the core of successful businesses do, address issues and solve problems for people. So hemp certainly has that potential.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about Midwest Hemp Technology. What is it?
Well, Midwest Hemp Technology is a processing company. We're located in Augusta, Kansas, and we have sort of two sides to the facility. We have a grain processing facility, so that is regulated as a food production facility. And over there, we're cleaning grain and sorting rocks and dirt, and also separating green seeds to black seeds. But based on their maturity and their density, and then what they're going to be used for after that. The other side of the facility is bales, processing fiber bales. And we're working with Kansas farmers nearby. We're in Butler County, so we're trying to work with farmers close to Butler County to bring in those fiber bales. And we're processing there in Augusta into hurd, fiber, and dust. We don't have a decorticator making long-strand fiber. We have more shaker tables and ear classifiers and hammer mills, and we're making short strand fiber
Okay.
and the dust from that. And we're just really coming online with that side of the facility in the last month or so. We had, like the rest of the world, some supply chain delays and
Yep.
some electrical delays, and but it's coming in at and corresponding with the harvest, this year's harvest, and even getting to the point of having that group of growers that we've been working with to have a crop to deliver this year. That's taken a couple of years really to get right and to learn and to dial in on the genetics and the planting techniques. And we feel like we're getting better at that side of it too.
Well, let's talk about that relationship with the farmers. You contract with these growers and that they're relatively local. How many growers do you have?
What we've been doing is research, grant funded research partnering, I guess we would call it. Let's say what we've been doing is grant funded research growing through SARE, which is Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education. And so for 2 seasons through the Kansas Hemp Consortium, we've had a group of about 5 growers, and we pay their licensing fees, we pot the seed, we collect data from their field, we have monthly growers calls so they can tune in, and we try to bring in the relevant expert at that point of the season. We've written a planting guide that's free for download on the KSM Consortium website. There's 60 or 70 years lacking of knowledge and development and infrastructure around this crop. So creating a network of growers, putting these resources in place, is using like the multi-state trials that the Kansas State University is involved in, using all of that data and providing information to growers is key, super key. You cannot just open up a processing facility and hope, I mean, maybe eventually, but right now, really having that relationship with the growers is super important. So several of the partners in Midwest Hemp Technology are producers or growers. So it's in everybody's interest to kind of have a supply and have a processing facility and then establish those sales chains after that.
Okay. I was going to ask if you have an agronomist on staff, but it sounds like you also have a lot of sort of support through the local networks there.
Right. We don't have an agronomist on staff. We this year we grew New West Genetics, and they have an agronomist on staff. So yes, we talk with their agronomist frequently, do video calls from the field, show them what we're looking at, seeing, and they've been really very helpful.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I know New West Genetics. Shout out to Wendy and Emma out there.
Yeah, we tried 6 different genetic varieties. The first, 2021 season. The first 2 years I grew in 2019 and 2020, but I was like everyone else focused on CBD. And so in 2021, we had 6 varieties of fiber and grain genetics. And New West Genetics was really the best producing of what we trialed, but also we had some different variations in the dates and the techniques and other things too. So there's a lot of factors that go into success. We've also always tried on dry land. We really are trying to make that work. And in some parts of the state, that works great. In other parts of the state, that's a no-go.
Right.
So lots to learn there. But this last season, we did just 2 varieties of New West Genetics, 2463 and 2370. and had good luck there. And they're bred in the Midwest. And we tried Ukrainian seed and Canadian seed, and it just I what we'd like to do is try some Kansas native seed, but the Kansas Department of Agriculture has a no-go on that. So
Okay.
yeah, interesting.
Yeah. So I was going to ask, what varieties are you growing and where you source your seeds, but yeah, you just told me that. So
I'm talking too long in my answers.
it's all good. Um, so I think you touched on this a little bit, but how did you decide to get into hemp and then to move, like, why did you decide to move into fiber and grain, like away from the cannabinoids?
Yeah, well, so I grew inside in a metal building the first 2 years. I grew for CBD the first 2 seasons, like 95% of all licenses in Kansas were designated for. And I was going to some of these events, and farmers were talking about walking their fields and pulling out males and drip tape, and it just did not equate to what I see as traditional production farming. And it wasn't a good match. People were spending a lot of time trying to grow hemp outside for CBD, and it was getting pollinated because there's a lot of native hemp in Kansas. And their crops were coming in at 5% CBD, which isn't even worth processing. There's no fiber and grain processing at the time, so their crop is pretty much worthless. And I really am into research, and I've spent a lot of, I have a master's degree in public affairs. I'm into the data and the why. And so and also the first 2 years of your license in Kansas, you had to have a research proposal. So in 2019 and 2020, to get a license to grow, you had to submit a research proposal to the State Department of Agriculture. So that's kind of where I started researching it and seeing how these mismatches were occurring, and the light bulb getting brighter and brighter that traditional production farming is a great fit for industrial hemp grown for fiber and grain. And we're going to move that way. It's not quite there yet. And there was a lot of glitz and gold attached to the CBD promises.
Yeah.
But long-term, scalable, matching traditional tools and techniques on production farms, industrial hemp is such an obvious match. And so then we did the grant funded research where we brought those different groups in 2021, and we tried the different seeds, the different techniques, the different timing, and then we dialed it in a little further. So this is the 4th season of research for us, and we do feel like we're getting better at it. And we're trying to share as much as we know, as quickly as we know it, with anyone that's interested in growing in the state.
Okay. Yeah, I imagine Kansas farmers know how to grow straw. They know how to grow grain. So perfect match,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
We grow a lot of wheat, corn, soybeans, sorghum. It's a good fit. We're still finding, like in Kansas, there's not a lot of active grain drying going on because it's not required right now with the crops that are dominant and the conditions. So to get hemp harvested at 15% moisture in the grain and needing to be dried down to under 10% within a few hours, that's a little hiccup. But we're starting to have grain elevators, come around, and like I've had one tour this week and one tour next week, and asking, where do we fit in? Where does this end? I'm like, there's a perfect spot for you. Grain drying, fire it up, get your bins cleaned out and get it ready. But in the whole state of Kansas this year is 530 acres of harvested hemp. So that's not enough for all the grain, all the elevators to really get excited about.
Yeah.
But you get those early adopters and people that see the potential, and then hopefully that meets the demand at the time. And then as the demand grows, other opportunities are there to meet it as well.
Right. The farmers that you're working with, I imagine they're, crop farmers. They're growing corn and soy. Are they seeing any benefit of putting hemp in the rotation?
Yeah, we've done some soil testing pre and post pre-planting and post harvest. Hemp does take nutrients out of the ground. There's more to it as far as the soil remediation, and that study we haven't done. Carbon credits, I think, are another way that farmers are starting to see how this crop could be beneficial to them. But really, because we've been doing the research growing, and because of the scale of hemp in the whole country really, but in Kansas, most people, I've seen maybe a couple 90 and 100 acre fields, but more 40 acres, 20 acres, getting the technique down. Other commodities are at an all-time high right now. So it's pretty hard to talk farmers into paying $1,500 worth of licensing fees, having all of this extra paperwork and inspections, having uncertain levels of success, and even just growing the crop. Like I mentioned, there are 3 processors in Kansas now, so you will have a buyer, and we have contracts for farmers for sure. So you know what your rates would be, you know what your projected yields should be, but that's barring unknowns that you can't control for. So it hasn't been massive. I haven't seen any 1,000-acre. I mean, there's not any because the whole state only had 500 acres. So one day, what is fields of wheat all over Kansas will be fields of industrial hemp.
Amen to that. Tell me about some of the products that you make, and then how do you market them?
Yeah. So like I said, we have the 2 sides, the grain side and then the fiber side. So on the grain side, we're making hemp seed oil and hemp seed protein powder. So that's the whole seed used up into 2 different products. We're partnering with a Cancana, who's a local, they're in Wichita as well, CO2 processor. And we're all kind of learning how this is working, but they're in primarily the CBD business. So they're taking flour and CO2 extracting the CBD out of it. They had a client recently that asked them about trying sunflower seeds in their CO2 extractor, and that came out beautifully. And so I was, have you tried hemp seed in there? He said, I don't have any. I was like, oh, I got a lot of it. So we brought it over, and he's grinding it, and it's about like 25% oil in the seed. So we're pressing the oil out with CO2 extraction, and then the protein powder that's left over, it includes the whole, which has fiber in it. I'm waiting on the full nutrition panel back on the seed protein powder, seed meal, whichever way you want to describe it. But it's definitely 30% protein. I already have the protein. I just don't have the full nutrition panel. And it's such an exciting product. And one day that is going to be a perfect thing to feed to animals. But right now that's out. But maybe some horses or dogs, but not cattle and not chickens. So those are the 2 grain products, the seed protein powder and the oil. And then on the fiber side, we're still just producing raw materials of herd fiber and dust. We're not making, insulation or wood flooring or anything like that. We're selling to people that are hopefully innovating with those types of products.
Right. Okay. Does the marijuana stigma affect what you're doing or the overall industry in Kansas?
Yes, we don't have medical cannabis. We don't have any legal access to cannabis in Kansas. And I've thought that would change for several years in a row. I think this year might be the year, but that's great on its own, but it's also going to be great for industrial hemp, because right now we're being regulated as though we're just almost to grow some high THC plants. And there's no separation between CBD processing and mechanical processing. There's no separation between growing a high CBD plant and growing a grain and fiber plant. We're all regulated the same. We're all licensed the same. We're inspected multiple times. We have all the same paperwork requirements, and we have that $1,500 licensing fee to grow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that I would really like to see industrial hemp treated like corn and wheat. And right now it's treated like it's medical marijuana.
Right.
So if we actually had a legal medical cannabis system in Kansas, I feel like that would get its due level of scrutiny. And then industrial hemp would be so obviously different than that it would be regulated more appropriately. But we don't have medical cannabis, so it's getting all the regulators' attention right now.
Right. Yeah, I appreciate your optimism on that. Are you familiar with the industrial hemp exemption? It's a proposal at this point, but they're trying to get that language into the 2023 Farm Bill.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds like it would be a good option. Um, I'm not familiar how if that would change what Kansas would do. I know some states have disbanded their state
Right.
licensing department. I assume there's probably some good and bad about that, but Kansas Department of Agriculture, I don't know if that would. I mean, I've passed their system 4 years in a row. I've never had a hot crop. They know the seeds that I'm growing don't even go hot. License background checks. They just came out again after harvest, after a whole year's worth of paperwork to make sure that there's not any seedlings growing, and pulled them out when they found them, which I had already done the day before. But it's just really a strange approach to a crop grown for fiber and grain.
Yeah.
And I'd like to see it more appropriately. I'd like to see those resources used to help grow the industry.
Yeah, for sure. I talked to, I guess he's the Commissioner of Agriculture of Kentucky, and I asked him, thoughts on the hemp exemption, and the way I understood his response was that like they're concerned that people are going to try to grow marijuana in their fiber and grain fields. And to me, it's just like, really? Like, have you seen what these crops look like? No one's going to be hiding their pot plants in fiber and grain fields. So I don't know. Hopefully we'll get some
No.
common sense regulation here someday soon. And there's some great people working towards that. So yeah, I'm
Yeah.
I'm optimistic too.
Yeah. You have to be. I mean, I always say, is it moving in the right track or the wrong direction? To me, it's moving in the right direction more slowly than I would like for it to. And it started really far backwards where it, never really should have been, but it is still moving in the right direction.
Yeah, yeah. So you mentioned some of the other, hemp processors in the state, and Kansas just seems to be a great place to grow hemp. Do you feel like you're competing with those other companies, or are you sort of in cahoots to help grow the industry? And I'm talking about South Bend and Prairie Bend.
Yeah. I we are at all the same events. We're always rooting for each other. I think we all need to succeed. There's so much blue sky, and the capacity of each one of our processing facilities is, I don't know, but it's not 100,000 acres for sure.
Yeah.
So each one of us could grow and still be great because given the potential of industrial hemp as a rotation crop in Kansas. But we all need the same things to happen. We need for farmers to not have to pay $1,500 license fees, and we need for them to not have, in Kansas, if you don't get a license to grow by March 15th, which means you have to have your fingerprints and background check turned in by then, you don't get a license. I mean, why is that? So there's a lot of dominoes that need to fall for
Yeah.
really any of us and all of us to succeed. So we're all working together on those types of things. And there's plenty of room. There's so much blue sky in this
Yeah.
industry. And I need them to advocate just as much as they need me to advocate. We need each other. And I think we're doing a good job of being good representatives for the state and making Kansas a hemp state. And that's what we all want, is for Kansas to be the hemp state.
Yeah. I drove through Kansas last year. I took a road trip to visit different producers and farmers sort of around the country. And I did stop by at South Bend Industrial Hemp. And yeah, just Kansas is so big. It's like, oh, we're still driving. Okay. And yeah, I mean, I have this vision of, yeah, just massive amounts of fiber and grain hemp growing. But anyway, I can get lost just in my dream about the future of hemp in America because there's so much good farmland,
And you can drive by. We had the field in Manhattan where we had the field day. People are driving it. You don't even really notice it, and that's kind of what you want, like for it to be so commonplace that
Yeah,
no one's stopping to take pictures of your hemp
right.
field. It's just there,
It's just a farm field,
right?
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me about the processing facility. What sorts of machines do you have? What are you running? What's capacity? What's output? That sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, we're just we have I guess I'm just gonna like go grain side for right now. So we're
Okay.
over there, we're just cleaning the grain, and then we're taking it to Canna in Wichita to be turned into the oil and the protein powder, and that's the CO2 extraction process. So they're the specialists in that, and it's
Okay. So you're not crushing the seed for oil; you're extracting the oil in with CO2. I'm just not
yeah,
familiar with that.
they're grinding it first and then extracting it with CO2
Oh,
and then
okay.
grinding it again a little bit so it's more uniform in color and size. And from what we've talked to people with mills, and because it's so oily, they have to have the oil separated from it.
Hmm.
Otherwise, it's like a cake, really. It's real like Play-Doh or something. So
Hmm.
it's a nice light powder after you extract the oil.
Okay.
And it's high in protein. But yeah, we're not doing that inside the facility. That's going on at Canna
Yeah.
in South Wichita, and
Okay.
that's a GMP certified facility. On the fiber side, we have a bale buster outside and a tractor to operate it with PTO. And then it's coming in, and we worked with Andrew Bishop and have mostly Forestburg equipment with the shaker tables and conveyors and air classifiers and SIGAFlow to pull the seed and then separate the dust collection and pull the dust off the fiber and the herd. Um, we've really been focused on the grain for the past 6 months or so. So right now we're even running some of the grain through the Forestburg equipment to clean off some herd off of it. But there's a lot of dialing in to figure out the exact airflows. And then, one bale out of one field, it's gonna be a little bit different on the settings than the next bale out of a different field. So we're figuring all of that out too. And then the different end use products, some people want more dust in it, some people want dust free, depending on what they're using it for. And so then trying to determine, are we going to keep changing our specs? Are we going to have one big customer or 10 small customers? All of that is really still coming together for us. And it's pretty good timing. The bales are coming in, machines are working, and we're getting it figured out. We're putting up signage about how to clean the machines at the end of the day, but it's still early for us for sure. But we're glad everything's turned on, everything's working, the bales are coming in, and we're figuring it out.
Nice, nice. How many employees do you have?
We have a sales manager, Jennifer Holmes, and we have two people that work in the facility. And then we have kind of a team of managing directors that include me and Troy Palmer. And we're not really there every single day, but we're working every single day from wherever we are.
Right. Okay. And then what are your plans for growth?
I think the capacity of the system that we have, is somewhere maybe around, depending on how many shifts you wanted to run, maybe a couple thousand acres. So we could either expand at that facility, maybe. We have the land, but the buildings are full, so we'd have to add more buildings. But we kind of think that once we get our recipes down real tight, it might make more sense to locate another maybe similarly sized facility 100 miles down the road or so, and just get closer to that next region of the state that is also going to be good at producing industrial hemp. So we're not sure exactly what the growth, we're trying to get it right on the front end right now.
Yeah, yeah.
But we do definitely understand if they have to drive the bales, if a producer has to drive the bales very far, it really starts to cut down on the efficiency of the whole project. So,
Sure.
right, that's what we're thinking now, is maybe some more small hub type systems and not a giant facility in the middle of the state.
What are like some of the bright spots that you see in the industry?
There's a lot. And I think it's really fun because you're working with a lot of other entrepreneurial people who are trying to figure out where hemp fits in their business, whether that's even insurance or accounting or law. Forget manufacturing, but people are trying to figure out, where does industrial hemp fit for them. So in addition to those standard industries, you are talking to inventors and people that are manufacturing things. I talked to the doctor the other day that was trying to figure out how to make a biodegradable suture out of hemp fiber. I send him samples. He's going to have to do some R&D. I try to tell him a little bit about who I might know that could maybe spin that into a twine type material, but I really am not sure about suturing. But that's just like conversations like that kind of come out of the woodwork almost every day. Somebody is calling with some sort of interesting idea, and they want to know how industrial hemp might serve whatever they're trying to build. And so that's really fun.
Yeah.
That keeps it interesting and kind of renews your excitement for it.
Good. Are you involved in any like educational efforts or programs or like community outreach,
Yes.
educational outreach?
Yes, I think it's so important to be involved in that because there's such a lack of information and there's a lot of bad information and there's just a lacking system for resources and infrastructure. So it's super important to be involved. And so we really host quite a few things through the Kansas Hemp Consortium, and that website's kshempconsortium.com. There's a free planting guide on there that anyone can download. It is kind of specific to Kansas. And it, like, the planting recommendations have New West genetics, depth and soil temperature and stuff. So it's not going to, tell you how to plant anything anywhere, but for what we've learned works, it's what's in there. Also, all of our past webinars are on the Kansas Hemp Consortium website, and we have one coming up on December 9th at 11 a.m. The Kansas Secretary of Agriculture is going to speak at that, and also several other guests, Morgan Tweet with IND Hemp and the Hemp Feed Coalition. But we've had 2 other webinars this year and a field day. So those events are on there. You can watch the old webinars. We've had entomologists. We have the multi-state variety trials. Dr. Griffin from K-State has spoken. The KDA has spoken. So there's a lot of resources that we're just trying to kind of bundle up and make really easy to digest. I was talking to a prospective grower yesterday, and he said, "Well, I just clicked on this link you sent me, and I'm reading all this legislation. And are you serious? We got to do it." I was like, "Let's don't read the legislation too many times. If you want to read it once, that's fine. But otherwise, there's a lot of. We've been doing this for 4 seasons now, so you're not just out here on your own trying to wade through 500 pounds of paperwork and figure it out. We can link arms. We can, help you through the licensing process. We know the seasonality of the paperwork that's required. We'll make sure you don't miss any deadlines. But it's a tall order to talk growers into trying industrial hemp in Kansas. The licensing fee is expensive. There's a lot of deadlines to meet. And so it's kind of, why would you want to give it a try when you know for sure you're going to be successful at traditional commodities, and they're at an all-time high right now. So it is important to give those resources to farmers and try to make it as easy as you can by sharing what you know and helping them out along the way.
Right. Do farmers there have to, like, that's a yearly fee, the $1,500, and do they have to get the background check and fingerprints every year?
Yes, I've gotten it 4 times.
Have your fingerprints changed from year to year? Like,
I guess they could.
I don't even understand that. Huh. Okay. This is so frustrating. It's like you don't need any of that stuff to grow, corn and soy. It frustrates me.
And I mean, you tell them what variety you're growing, so they know that I'm not growing anything that is a high CBD or THC variety. They know that it's outside. And yet, generally, I'll have 4 inspections, 4 visits from the KDA in a year. They come and take the top cola that they can find and put it in an evidence bag.
Right, because it's a crime scene, right? Yeah, it's a potential crime scene.
Funny. I was like, why do you guys have to put that in there?
Well, I was going to ask, how involved is the Kansas Department of Agriculture? And clearly, they're pretty involved, huh?
They're involved. They're holding a stakeholder meeting. I think it's about December 19th in Abilene. And they really, at this point, we've been working with them for 4 years, and I think there's a lot of great people there, and they do want it to succeed. and their hands are sometimes tied by the legislation, just like ours are. But I see them advocating for rule changes and easing of restrictions and more common sense approaches. I see them being active on advocacy for that, and I appreciate that. And I think they're doing as the best that they can within the structure that they have to work from.
Right, right. You mentioned the Kansas Hemp Consortium. Are there other associations that you work with out there?
Yes, the Kansas Hemp Consortium and the December 9th webinar, that's in collaboration with Planted Association, Kansans for Hemp, the WSU Small Business Development Center, and then IND Hemp is going to be there with Morgan, Tiger Fiber is going to be there with Rich Selby, KDA's there with Secretary Mike Beam, and then Troy Palmer is there with Midwest Hemp Technology. So we're trying to feature as many companies and active growers and processors as we can. And then those advocacy groups, we're pretty well aligned as far as we working together. And we'll all be at that hemp stakeholders meeting later in the month in December. And I also do some medical cannabis advocacy. I was in the hemp chair for the Kansas Cannabis Chamber. And I think that is, again, to like put the hemp perspective in with the medical cannabis conversation so that we can not, maybe accidentally hurt one another's interest, but also just see that it is so different. So I feel like that's an important kind of crossover too, as far as research and education go.
Good. I will like to point out that IND Hemp is one of our sponsors for the podcast. So
they've done so much for the industry. I'm
yeah.
continually grateful to Morgan and Ken and everything that it's such an uphill battle, and it seems sometimes pretty far off the scaling of it all, but it's inching in the right direction, and they're just doing so much to make it happen.
Yeah. Were you at the Montana Hemp Summit back in August? Okay. That explains why I didn't meet you there. So, okay. But there was a ton of people there, so I didn't get to talk to everybody, okay.
Pretty good event, huh?
Yeah, it was really good. It was just like, 2 days of just real conversation, about fiber and grain, and like how to move the industry forward, how to work together, how to unify the voice. There was talk about, like a trade alliance, and just, it was fascinating, like for me, I'm a journalist. I like stories, and I love watching this industry build itself from the ground up. Like you never see this, right? This is a once in a lifetime story from my perspective. And I'm just very grateful that I get to, sort of help tell this story. And I've met so many great people in the space. So yeah, it's been life-changing for me, for sure.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So tell me, I guess we touched on this a little bit, but like, tell me your vision for hemp in Kansas, in the Midwest, in the US. Like if all barriers were removed, what would industrial hemp be like if it were up to you?
If it doesn't have to be up to me, but I think the future of industrial hemp does look like a large scale rotation crop in Kansas and the Midwest. I think the grain elevator network is going to come together and see the potential of drying and storing it, and being a resource for growers there. I think it's going to become commonplace to where, like we mentioned, you drive by fields of hemp and maybe look over and say, oh, that's beautiful, just like you do when you see a wheat field in the sunset, but it's not novel or new, and you don't have to stop and take pictures. You understand that you don't smoke or consume that plant for the purposes of anything psychoactive, but that it is a high protein food and a renewable source of a lot of consumer goods that could replace plastic and wood. And it's valued for just that. I think it could become a common bioplastic replacement that would really change a lot of industry in such a positive way. I'm really pumped about the opportunities there. But right now, people can still choose to incorporate industrial hemp in their lives in much the same way. It's just a smaller scale. But you can eat hemp grain foods. You can use hemp grain oil in cooking and health and beauty products. You can find it, not as readily available, but in paper products and textiles. My shirt is industrial hemp, but it is 55% hemp and it's still coming from China. So, maybe one day we could have some American hemp textiles would be a beautiful dream to come true. That one probably feels a little further off, but today you can incorporate hemp in your life in small ways. And I think if we can all start doing that, we can keep seeing the scale build. And that's what I'd like to see happen over the next 5 or 10 years. And I think we're moving that way, picking up steam.
Yeah, good. Thank you for sharing your vision with me. So one more question. And I think you sort of touched on it a little bit, but really, like, why hemp? Like, you could have chosen something easier. So I'm curious, like, what drives you?
One of my partners said that the other day. He said, now, Sarah, there's easier ways to make money. And I said, yeah, I know that, but I have 4 kids and I'd like to see the world still be an inhabitable place that supports a nice lifestyle for them. And I think we have the ability to do that. And I like solving problems. And I have met, like you, a lot of cool, just dedicated, kick-ass people along this ride. And that encourages you to stay involved and keeps your energy up for the task at hand. And then, like I said, talking to other entrepreneurs and inventors and people that are trying to figure out how hemp can serve their industry or their product, that's super invigorating. I'm encouraged by the health benefits of hemp protein and an oil that's high in omega-3 and 6 healthy fat. They call it a near perfect source of protein. There's no sugar. It's vegan. We should be using this. And everyone knows that providing a new rotation crop to farmers is the absolute best thing you can do for their livelihood, which trickles into the rest of our livelihood. So it feels like hemp is meeting the moment as far as where the world is and what it needs to be sustainable. And that's fun to be involved in. And the people are awesome to work with. And it feels like, at Freddy's, I sold a lot of cheeseburgers, and that was great too. But, at the end of the day, you want to leave a mark with something that's good for the world and the people that stay around after you're gone. So I feel like hemp is that.
Sarah Stevens from Midwest Hemp Technology. It's so great to meet you and talk to you today. And we'll put a link to the webinar on December 9th on the show page for this episode and any other links that you want to send to me.
Thank you. I'll send you the flyer in case that's a good little thumbnail image. And
yeah, we'll put that up too.
You'll probably have to do some editing here, but I don't think I cussed too much, so that's good.
I don't think you cussed at all, so I think we're good. But it's great to talk to you. So thank you.
I appreciate you, Eric. Thanks for all you're doing to make the industry move forward. It's important.
All right, here we are. It's the end of the show. Thank you so much for listening to today's program. Be sure to check out the links at lancasterfarming.com for those news stories, that UN report, and the links to Midwest Hemp Technology and their upcoming webinar. So, all right, my name is Eric Herlock. I'm the digital editor at Lancaster Farming Newspaper, the greatest agricultural newspaper in the world. Check us out online, get a subscription. You will not be disappointed. All right, if you want to get in touch with me, you can always email me directly. Send it to podcast@lancasterfarming.com, and I'll write back to you. Yeah, if you have suggestions, comments, questions, life advice, whatever, I want to hear from you. Okay, so until next time, I will see you in the newspaper.
Industrial hemp
Season 2, Episode 46 of the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast is copyright 2022 by Lancaster Farming Newspaper, part of the Steinman Communications family. Today's show is written and recorded, edited and produced by Eric Herlock. Any music you hear throughout the show, as always, is courtesy of Tin Bird Shadow.